chainers, wherever you are in the world. This is Sarah Barnes-Humphrey with you today. Are you ready? Let's talk supply chain. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Thoughts and Coffee. My name is Sarah Barnes-Humphrey. I'm the founder and host of Let's Talk Supply Chain, the Blended Podcast, and the founder of the Blended Pledge. And we've got a great show for you today. I've got Ari and Eric Johnson coming on the show to talk about Inland. Inland is happening next week. And so Thoughts and Coffee next Tuesday, I'm actually going to be doing live from Chicago, which is exciting. But before we get to all of that, we do need to give a shout out to our show sponsor, the Secret Society of Supply Chain, and give a shout out to our newest members who are Mary Tella. We've got Jessica, Laura Mason, and Amy Luong. Thank you so much for joining us. Head over to secretsocietyofsupplychain.com to get your membership today. We also have the Women in Supply Chain Connections as a part of that as well. All right, let's get to our first. Let's talk about what's happening at Let's Talk Supply Chain. So we've got a brand new podcast episode. It's episode 491, wherever you listen to the show. Now, the title on here says 2028 Shippium counts down to the AI revolution. But Jason shared the episode yesterday, and we had a bit more of a provocative title on here talking about the speed of AI and human delays. Go and check that out. He posted it over on LinkedIn, and check out the episode wherever you listen to the show. We've got a lot of live shows coming up for you over the next couple of weeks. So make sure to click the attend button for all of them, even if you can't attend live, because we want to send you the link to that. Now, Eric is with me today, and then he goes live again on Friday for the gold rush of agentic AI in logistics. I want to hear more about this. I don't know if we'll get to that today, so you definitely want to tune in on Friday. And then Wednesday, October 1st at 1 p.m. Eastern, I am going live with Conrad Smith of Graphite. If you haven't heard of Graphite, if you haven't heard of Conrad is somebody you definitely want to tune in for. We are going to be talking about how to cut onboarding time, give procurement the speed advantage. Now, this is what you're going to need to know. These are all of the insights you're going to need going into 2026. So definitely do not miss this particular live either. Then we've got Thursday, October 2nd, 2 p.m. Eastern. I'm going live with Bryant Smith of Manhattan, and we're going to be talking about smarter, stronger transportation by 2030. You might be thinking we're only in 2025, but 2030 is right around the corner, and we've got lots going on in transportation and logistics that you want to keep an eye on going into 2030. All right. And then Thursday, November 6th at 1 p.m. Eastern, I'm actually going to be on site in Paris, and we're going to be sharing all of the insights that come out of Biz Now by Shipio on site at their conference in Paris. And so these are going to be conversations with supply chain game changers. We're going to share all the insights and show you a little bit of a sneak peek of what happened at their conference. Next, what do we have next? Oh yeah, of course we have Inland. I just mentioned that I'm going to be hosting Inland TV. That's coming up on Monday and Tuesday. And Eric and Ari are here to talk all about what's going to be happening at Inland. What are the hot topics? What are we going to talk about? So we're going to get to that in just a little bit. And in-person conferences, again, I'm going to be at Visibility Now. Women in Supply Chain Forum is happening November 18th through 20th. Katie Date and I are doing a workshop on the 20th that you're not going to want to miss. So if you're signed up for it, make sure you sign up for that workshop. And then Manifest, February 9th through 11th. Now, we've got a big announcement coming out, but I don't think we're ready to spill the beans just yet. So stay tuned, because hopefully I can talk about that in the next week or so. And last but not least, I don't know if you saw this yesterday, but I announced that I'm going to be a published author on October 21st. I have a book coming out, and I can't wait to share it all with you. No, it's not about supply chain. You can kind of see that from the title. It's a memoir, and it's about self-worth based on my life experiences. So there's a link in the comments to sign up for the launch on October 21st, and hopefully you can join us for that. All right. Well, now it's time to bring up our guests for today. Eric, Ari, how you doing?
Good. No
complaints. All good. Although I'm going to be in Paris with you at the Shipio event, so kind of wish I was in Paris right now instead of where I am, but good things can be worth the wait.
Wow, our company signed off on an expense trip to Paris.
No, they're covering the cost of travel because I'm speaking there. So
yeah, awesome. Well, I mean, with your travel schedule, though, you have to be a little bit glad that you're at home for today because you're going to be traveling back to Chicago. You were in Chicago last week too.
This will be 3 times in Chicago this month. Yeah, so there's lots of freight events, lots of logistics events.
That's awesome. Well, I want to get to your introduction for everybody who's watching, and make sure to put your comments in the comment section. I want to know where you're tuning in from, and if you like the conversation, always get your fire emojis ready because I love to see a fire emoji. All right, Eric, start us off. Who are you? What do you do? Because I'm not entirely sure, and I think everybody else needs to,
Okay, I am a journalist. I'm with the Journal of Commerce. I'm the senior technology editor. I work with Ari. I report basically on software, data, all the new trends, including AI. You mentioned I have a guest on my show on your network on Friday, where we're going to be talking about agentic AI, which is seemingly all that anybody wants to talk to me about these days. So,
is it?
Yeah. And I host TPM Today, as you mentioned, 2 times a month on your network.
Yeah. Well, do they, AI is not that big of a topic. Is everybody talking about it? Are we going to be talking about it at Inland? Because
we're going to try to talk about automation more than AI. AI is one way to get you to automation, but it's not the only way. So yeah, we'll be trying to put it in practical terms, not in thought leadership terms. So.
Pie in the sky. All right, Ari, tell everybody who you are, what you do.
Yeah, so I'm also a senior editor at the Journal of Commerce. I cover all things intermodal rail, cover a lot of trucking as well. So basically anything on the U.S. surface within my purview.
Awesome. And you're going to give us a bit of a market update coming up soon, which is kind of my favorite part. But first, we have to get to the poll of the week. So we ask a question to everyone on our Let's Talk Supply Chain LinkedIn page every single Wednesday morning. Now, for this one, the question was, what best describes your supply chain life? I warned you guys about this before we went live. We got 139 votes for this one. So people seem to like this one. 32% of you said living in Excel, forever busy. 28% ETAs, expecting trouble always. 25% says meetings, that could be emails. That is my world. 15% says coffee is my true co-pilot. I think I'm almost at all of the above. I mean, looking at all of this, what does this look like for you? Or even better, what does it look like for the people you've been talking to this month?
I know my answer is very much living in Excel, forever busy.
Ari's our in-house data guy, so I can imagine. I was gonna guess that was gonna be his answer. Mine is coffee because luckily I have the good fortune of talking to people who experience all these, but I don't actually necessarily have to. Well, I suppose meetings, it could be emails, is like something everybody suffers. So Sarah, next time you send a meeting invite, I'm just gonna be like, this could be an email.
Don't do it. That's so funny.
By the way, I'm impressed. 139 votes is more than a lot of industry surveys get for actual like data that we that put out reports about like the state of the industry. So that's a good number of votes.
Yeah, we love our community and our audience because we get high numbers of votes on these things, and I think everybody kind of likes them. Sometimes we throw them a loop and we don't ask them a supply chain question, and people are like, "Where's the supply chain question?" We're like, we just need to have some fun sometimes. But definitely for this one, I will say the 32% for the Excel kind of surprised me because we've got a lot of tech out there. We've got a lot of tech companies out there talking about how they're eliminating Excel, but we still have 32% living in Excel. And I understand from Ari's point of view with the data and all that kind of stuff. But Eric, what are we doing wrong?
I mean, if you ask any software provider who they're competing against, it's pretty rarely that it's a direct software competitor. It's usually like getting people out of Excel. That's been the default answer for like as long 15 years, and it's still the case. So
yeah, apparently it still is. All right. Well, now and if you haven't voted on that poll, head over to the link in the comments. If you're over on my personal LinkedIn, I'll get to that just after the show. But we'd love to hear from you on all of those answers as well. All right. So let's get to the market update. I know there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of disruptions. Ari, you are knee deep in data like every single day. So give us a bit of an update. Obviously, don't spill all the tea because I know we're going to get most of the tea at Inland, but give us, some high level and what we can expect.
Sure. So let me start briefly with trucking. This was actually one of the Excel things I was doing right before we hopped on here. The spot market in truckload is slightly up compared to a year ago, but it's only a couple percentage points nationally on the dry van space. And the reason why the low percentage is relevant is because for almost 3 years now, we've had a market where spot market rates are cheaper than contract rates, which is really the inversion of what it's supposed to be. You're supposed to get a discount by signing a 12-month contract. And so spot rates being up 2% year over year may close the gap back down to zero on the penalty, but doesn't shove us into a market where contracts save shippers money, or shippers are like, oh, I can't be on the spot market. I got to flood to the safety of a contract market. That's not enough of a growth rate to really shake the markets towards contractual freight. Now, the reason why this is relevant over to intermodal freight is because intermodal always follows truckload. If you don't have a healthy truckload market, then it's very hard for intermodal providers to get pricing. And so, the way I think about it as we head into Inland on September 29th to October 1st is that there was a halfway decent peak season on the West Coast. There's some growth in the East in terms of intermodal. But last year, we had a monster peak season on the West Coast. Some of the biggest numbers, particularly on a major lane like Los Angeles to Chicago, that we've ever seen in the history of intermodal. And it still didn't make a difference. Contracts still barely moved in the 2025 cycle. So I look at this market and it's not really outperforming last year. And I sit here and I say, what is it going to take? We're just in this holding pattern.
Yeah.
Sarah, just to be clear on why the intermodal piece is dependent on truckload. If you can get a cheap spot rate on truckload, you're going to choose that because that's a direct connection to the point you need to deliver your goods over intermodal, where obviously there's a rail leg that then needs to be connected to a short haul move.
You have to have so many different things that come together in perfect sync. Whereas you stick it on a truck, it goes from origin to destination. That's it.
Yeah. What do you think it's going to take? Are we going to sort of find the answers to that during some of the conversations at Inland? Because, one of the things that I've been hearing a lot is also this freight recessions that we've had over the last 18 months and things like that. And so are we sort of coming out of that? Are we seeing some hope there? Are we going to be having conversations where we're going to be figuring out what it's going to take for us to move forward?
Yeah. So I think one of the themes that will come out of the event is that at this point, I think it's hard to say that it's a supply problem. I think at this point, there's been a lot of supply that's come out of the market. It's a demand problem. And what I like to tell people is there's a supply and demand curve. It's not just a supply curve, it's a supply and demand curve. And the demand curve is simply not growing in any significant way. For people who pay attention to the markets, you can look up industrial production numbers, you can look up manufacturing numbers, housing starts. There are a lot of numbers out there that just aren't really growing at any noticeable rate. They're just kind of lackluster. And so I think the theme is, when does the demand pick up to be able to propel a rate increase from the carriers? And maybe the Fed cutting the interest rates and more to come, as they claim, maybe that does it. But until the Fed acts with more than a 25 basis point cut, hard to see it, because that impacts housing, and housing tends to be the first thing we tend to look at before we start saying the dry van market picks up, because housing and all the stuff around housing, that does a lot of freight. That really drives a lot of freight to dry van.
Yeah, actually, I saw Kevin O'Leary on Good Morning America this morning. I don't know if anybody else was watching it. And a question was, what's going to happen with the interest rates? And one of the things he said was, it's not ever going to go back to 3.5% for mortgage rates and things like that. So I just wanted to throw that in there because you're talking about housing, and I heard that.
Never say never. When we were at virtually 0%, I don't think anyone could have fathomed going up to like 7%. So like, I think you Canadians have to stick together, I guess. Is that what it's all about? So no, I think Ari's got it exactly right. One thing I would add, because I look at this obviously from the technology standpoint, the market is sort of performing ahistorically, in part because the supply did not leave the market at a point where it normally would have. So if demand was kind of static or going down as it has been, you would have seen a huge sort of departure from the market of a lot of capacity that just hasn't left. And I think I attribute part of it to there's lots of technology plays that keep smaller carriers kind of just alive long enough to stay in the market.
Right.
Whether it's things they're using themselves or marketplaces they can tap into that in 5 years or the last down cycle they wouldn't have had access to. So I think that plays a role. It's probably not the defining role in it, but it plays a part. And so
yeah, no, it's a really good point to make, right? Because when we think about this and we think about access to technology, it is, somewhat leveling a playing field that wasn't there before. And so I think it's a really good point to make. But we're going to shift, right? Because you're saying there's a lot of supply and not enough demand. And we're going to shift into our first article, which has to do with fire trucks. And this has the opposite problem. We have a lot of demand and not a lot of supply, which is actually driving prices up on fire trucks. And you kind of think, well, what do fire trucks have with supply chain? Well, at the end of this article, they actually blame labor shortages, access to raw materials, production delays on supply chain, which I thought was very interesting. So I wanted to talk about this particular article because fire trucks, really, we see them every day. They affect everyday lives. They're not something that we think a lot about, but they're in a lot of trouble right now. So Eric, when you saw this particular article, what did you think about this?
Okay, I think this particular piece hits on something that's been like a pet peeve of mine for basically since, the last 5 years, which is when everyone started caring about supply chain, they started talking about the supply chain as if everybody has one common supply chain, right? They work on. This is a perfect example of how certain supply chains are completely without demand and oversupplied, and others struggle because they have more, niche or parts where they're in lower supply, right? And so one thing this sort of highlighted to me is how we need to think of like each individual vertical or each individual company is having their own very specific supply chain, and we can't apply what's going on in the broader market necessarily to every single instance. I mean, the companies that Ari and I talked to, you could even say some of the bigger ones have dozens, if not hundreds of individual supply chains for all of their product categories. They wouldn't even call themselves having one supply chain. So to me, the message of this was you have to be careful about like applying market aggregate trends to one specific example.
Yeah, absolutely. But then also how monopolies can happen. If we don't have enough manufacturing, it actually is driving up the costs of the fire trucks, which are desperately needed. One example that they used in this particular articles were the LA fires. And they had 100+ fire trucks out of commission that they couldn't use because they had these trucks are 25 to 30 years old and they either can't get the parts or they can't get a new one within a limited budget that they have to be able to buy fire trucks. Ari, do you want the last word on this one before we move on?
Yeah, I was just gonna, echo Eric's point that, in my last answer, we were talking about manufacturing and the industrial production numbers. And I know Professor Jason Miller at Michigan State University will love this comment. If you look at industrial production, there are dozens, maybe even at this point over 100 different industrial production metrics covering any in all commodity codes that are out there. So, when I say in the last answer, hey, manufacturing so-so and industrial production so-so, that's aggregating all of it together. But one of the data points I do track on my Excel spreadsheets is industrial production across as many of those as I can get my mind around. And within the subset, there are industries where industrial production is spiking right now. And then there are other ones where it's chasming, and then there are others that are just kind of ho-hum. So
Yeah.
to Eric's point, like even in industrial production, when you break it down to commodity codes, there are things that are high in demand right now, and there are things that are not in demand whatsoever. It's not one market.
Yeah,
I would,
absolutely.
Sarah, I would just say, I know we have lots of other stuff to talk about, but fire trucks is an interesting example too, because there's a political dynamic to things like getting funding and political
Fair.
will around updating fleets and things that does not exist in the pure private sector. So that's my one caveat on the fire truck thing too.
All right, fair point. I think everybody should go and read that article. So it's in the comments. It'll be in the comments of my personal LinkedIn after this. All right, let's get to our second article. Now, this is around a merger. So Ari, you wrote this article. Talk to us about this. What are the key highlights, and how does it bring us back to the conversations we're going to be having at Inland?
So it starts with really the big announcement back in July, where Union Pacific Railroad put in an offer that Norfolk Southern accepted to acquire Norfolk Southern. And now it's before U.S. regulators. We're waiting for the actual application, but we've started the process where U.S. regulators get to give the thumbs up or the thumbs down. And if it were approved, then it would create the first transcontinental U.S. railroad. As it stands right now, if you're moving something from California to New York or New Jersey, you take it to Chicago. BNSF or UP hand it off to an Eastern Railroad. They take it to the final destination. Lots of issues historically in Chicago and Memphis on that handoff. It causes delays, a day and a half, sometimes 2 days of delays. And so you bring two railroads together, one in the west, one in the east, a single railroad. Now you don't have to switch between two railroads. You're on one train from like California to New York or New Jersey, or California to Georgia, and you have a seamless experience without sort of that delay in the middle that always happens, frankly. Now the response from BNSF, obviously a competitor to Union Pacific, they've got to do something, otherwise they're sort of at a disadvantage. They've gone to CSX, and they're not merging in the same way that UP and NS are, but they realize, hey, NS and UP are in bed together. Now we've got to get in bed with the competitor to NS. So now we're going to get in with CSX, two Western railroads aligned with two Eastern railroads. And how can we build lanes that challenge a combined UP-NS railroad? And so historically, the BN has had a train that's run from Southern California to Atlanta with CSX that has essentially been single line, like with a small interchange in Birmingham. They've expanded that now to Charlotte and Jacksonville. It'll still go through Atlanta. There's a Phoenix to Atlanta lane. And then one of the things I think we'll be talking about quite a bit at Inland is, where do we go from here? Because there's still one big lane left where a lot of freight moves, that BN and CSX, if they could work together, there's a lot of freight to capture and a lot of competition with the UP and the NS. And that would be Southern California, even Northern California and Seattle to Newark, the Northern New Jersey area. There's a lot of freight that moves on that cross-country route. If BN and CSX can figure it out, and I think they have to, because UP and NS will definitely figure it out, then we start getting some real competition on some major freight corridors.
Wow, it sounds exciting. I can feel the passion that you have for this. And you're going to be doing an interview, I believe, right? At Inland,
yes.
At everybody?
So I'm going to talk to the CEO of Union Pacific, Jim Vena, and he is the guy who's doing all the rounds right now. He was at the White House. He hit the gavel at the New York Stock Exchange. So he's been some pretty fun places. We're really going to go into depth on what this means for some of the companies that use both Union Pacific and Norfolk Southern today. So Hub Group, Knight Swift Transportation, these brokers like Mode Global and Uber Freight, among many others. What does it mean for them? How are they going to have a better experience than they have today in the UP Norfolk Southern world? We'll really focus both on sort of the West Coast to Northeast route, but also the West Coast to the Southeast route, because there are different challenges on doing a true transcontinental railroad to the Northeast and the Southeast. They're not the same. There are different obstacles along the way. So we'll try and see if the CEO, Jim Vena, will walk through how they overcome some of those obstacles to create a single line service.
Well, and maybe spill some secrets.
People are saying that he's most excited about coming to inland, even more than going to the White House or the New York Stock Exchange.
Wow. Because he's talking to Ari. That's why.
Exactly.
I mean, who doesn't want to talk to Ari, right? I mean, I'm just, grateful that you showed up on the show today. So he's going to spill all the secrets, which is amazing. If you don't have your ticket for inland, you can still get a ticket. So I want to make sure that you guys do that. Grab your tickets. There is a code for a discount going across the screen right now. Grab it before it leaves and make sure you get your ticket. And hopefully I'm going to see you there because I'm going to be hosting Inland TV. Last but not least, we have one more article and we can't spend too much time on it. We've only got a couple of minutes. But I do want to mention it. We're all talking about supply chain restructuring. What does that mean? And so I wanted to bring this to the forefront because Diageo is closing an Ontario bottling facility and they're moving it to Quebec. Actually, when I was reading this article, they said they wanted to get closer to the US consumer. And so I thought the bottling facility would be moved to the US, but it's not. It's being moved to Quebec, which I thought was quite odd. But when we think about supply chain restructuring, these are obviously only, parts of that equation and what people are thinking about. Ari, Eric, do you have any thoughts on this and what we should be thinking about when we're seeing these companies restructure their supply chains like this?
Well, let me start. So I hadn't read this in detail, but I would sort of scratch my head at that, because if I'm thinking of transportation and only through transportation, Ontario is probably
that's what I
better
thought.
Province to be in than Quebec. Rail perspective, there are a ton of rail ramps in the Toronto area and even other points in Ontario outside of Toronto, other parts of Ontario province. There really isn't that much of a transportation, at least across border US, transportation network to the same level and degree as Ontario and Quebec.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that. Eric, anything to add?
I would just add, a couple of weeks ago, I was at an event, the ACSM event, which is this Association of Supply Chain Managers. And one of the things that came up was that everybody is thinking they're having to spend some amount of time, which is non-zero amount of time, figuring out how their supply chain needs to change, where they source from, do they have transportation capacity to serve a new area? Do they need to relocate distribution centers? Do they need to relocate manufacturing hubs, right? Everybody is going through this exercise. And I think we're probably going to end up with some like curious decisions out of this, because I think, the amount of time that's spent on it is that time and that effort costs money, and you're also enlisting sometimes outside help to help you figure out, which costs money to figure out and game plan and what if. So we're just in this weird scenario where everybody is sort of examining everything, even things that sort of ostensibly work. I suspect this is like one of a million examples of this.
Maybe if they're close to Montreal, that's the only sort of place I could think of that in Quebec the Quebec province where it would work would be if you're like near Montreal.
Yeah, there's also some tax implications that people need to look into. I think as
well. There must be some incentives, right? Like the businesses.
Maybe. But also, if we think about investment, there's going to be investment on the restructuring side. There also needs to be investment in the tech side. So companies are really looking at quite a big investment in the business directly impacting their supply chains and making their supply chains more competitive, making it a competitive advantage. And so there's going to be a lot of dollars going into supply chain, I think, over the next couple of years. Well, listen, we are at the end of the show. Ari, Eric, thank you so much for coming on and giving us a sneak peek into Inland next week. Again, if you don't have your ticket, go and get your ticket now, because you're not going to want to miss even that interview that Ari's got lined up for next week. And Eric's going to be on stage as well with a lot of exciting conversations too. Thank you all for watching today, and I will see you live from Chicago next Tuesday. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.